Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Adonis, and I have the pleasure of opening our webinar this afternoon. I'm the current president of the Collections Care and Conservation Alliance, and today I'm coming to you from the University of Vermont. And I just wanted to share a general welcome to all of you and an official thanks to Bob for giving us this presentation this afternoon. And to give you just a real quick overview about CCCA and what we do for anyone who may be new to us. So the mission of the Collections Care and Conservation Alliance is to improve collections care by providing information and education to individuals, organizations, and institutions that are responsible for preserving a wide range of cultural heritage collections, including art, artifacts, historical records, and other collections such as outdoor sculpture. We have a network of conservation and preservation professionals. Um, we are a nonprofit based in the state of Vermont, but we do have members coming to us from all over the US. We have a couple different categories of membership. We have professional affiliate members and emerging professional members. And I invite you to visit our website to learn more about member benefits and becoming a member if that's something that may be of interest to you. We offer multiple programs each year, such as webinars like this one. And included in the registration for today's event is the option to attend a follow-up meeting next week, which will be Thursday, April 3rd from 12 to 1. A conversation with colleagues session that's designed to be an informal session to pose additional questions that may occur to you, or perhaps you have a deeper question that's more specific to your site or your collections that you'd like to pose to Bob. So Bob will be there. There will also be some representatives of CCCA attending, and we encourage you to join us then. Okay, so for now, I'm going to turn things over to Darlene Bialowski, the Vice President of CCCA, to kick off today's program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Erica. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's great to see some friendly faces and some names that I haven't seen in a while, so welcome, everyone. The CCCA appreciates your interest in our organization, as Erica hasn't explained, and the programs that we organize. Every dollar you spend on registration or on your membership goes to helping us develop timely programs and events and workshops. So let me now take no other time to talk about anything else but introducing you to Bob Hannum, who is a Collections Care and Conservation Alliance professional affiliate and has for some time now wanted to bring this presentation to our audience. Bob will take questions after his talk, and you can either put your questions into the Q&A tab on your screen, or you can make note and ask us yourself when we open up the program at the end for questions. For over 45 years, Bob has served museums, artists, corporations, and private collectors. His art conservation expertise includes many aspects of contemporary sculpture and hanging art installation. Restoration and maintenance, including graffiti removal, water and smoke disaster restoration, gilded and plaster frame repair, cleaning grave markers, and ceramic restoration, an all-over type of professional. He has restored works by some of the most contemporary artists, including Maya Lin, Roy Lichtenstein, Vicente Manasala, Frank Stella, and Christo. His clients include the Guggenheim and Hirshhorn Museums, the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the U.S. Department of State, and numerous art foundations and private collectors. Bob is going to provide us this afternoon with an overview of the exciting restoration of Vermont's newly dedicated national treasure. It's a collection of 16 monumental sculptures created some 50 years ago by artists all over the world and placed in rest areas along I-89 and I-91. His team began conservation work last year in 2024 in consultation with the Getty Conservation Institute and with generous grant funding by the Save America's Treasures program. We're going to learn about some fascinating projects and help solve some lingering mysteries along the way. So thank you, Bob, and I turn everything over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Darlene. I'm really excited about this presentation. So, and I appreciate all your your calls of support in coming up to this event. So thanks again.
My pleasure.
So let's get right into it. I'm Bob Hannum, and for the next 45 minutes, I'm going to tell you all about sculpture on the highway, which, by the way, is the most fascinating project I've ever been involved in all my 45 years in the business. I'm going to cover the history of the collection, why it's so special, our conservation efforts, and exciting plans for the future. And again, there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions. First, I wanted to clear up what might be a confusion for some. For anyone who received the notice about this webinar with my picture and a huge bronze sculpture of whale tails, the whale tails is not part of this collection. I just want to make that clear. And perhaps in the future, we'll talk about bronze sculpture care. So what is sculpture on the highway? This in the next slide is the collection. It's a multi-year project to conserve and interpret a collection of 16 monumental outdoor sculptures. 9 of them are concrete, 7 are marble, created over 50 years ago by artists from all over the world. All but one artist has now passed away. Many are now famous in their own countries. For instance, Clement Meadmore here in the United States and in his home country of Australia. And Karl Prantl, an Austrian sculptor who's now very famous all throughout Europe. These sculptures were placed in rest areas, as was mentioned, all up and down Vermont's interstate highways I-89 and 91, from the Massachusetts border to Canada. So going north and southbound, it's over 400 miles, making our collection the largest sculpture park in the world. Now, 50 years ago, these highways were just being completed and rest areas were wide open spaces. So you'll see on the left here an image of one of the sculptures as it was originally placed. And you can see the wide open space with the mountain in the background. And to your right is how it looks today, entirely covered by forest growth. So now most of the sculptures are hidden by forest growth, as I mentioned. Some have even toppled down. And some are in rest areas that are no longer even open to the public. So most of our marvelous collection is hidden to the public. Restoration began last year when we began cleaning and repairing each sculpture. We'll complete this first stage later this year. The next stage is moving each sculpture out of the forest, out of their closed rest areas onto foundations. Then we have exciting plans to improve each rest area with accessible paths, evening lighting, signage, and landscaping. Finally, we plan to integrate the collection into Vermont's tourism industry with exciting ideas that I'll tell you more about later. So what makes this collection so special? Why is it a national treasure? Well, besides the incredible beauty in the eyes of contemporary art fanatics like myself, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, it's one of the earliest examples of a famous movement in art known as the International Sculpture Symposium. And the founder of this movement participated in our first symposium. Another reason this collection is so important is that it's one of the earliest uses of concrete in art. So the story of sculpture on the highway actually begins in 1959. Austrian sculptor Karl Prantl, seen here and actually working on his Vermont sculpture. Karl came up with an idea to gather sculptors from around the world to live and create together for 2 months, exchanging ideas and methods. His daughter Katerina recently told us that her father passionately believed that this cross-cultural dialogue might help ease the growing tensions of the Cold War at the time. He named this idea the International Sculpture Symposium. Well, it became one of those ideas that just took off. Every year since that first event in 1959, there's been a symposium, sometimes several, somewhere in the world, every single year. And the movement is growing. For instance, there's a symposium now in China every single year, and last year over 200 sculptors participated. Now let's fast forward 9 years later to 1968. Vermont sculptor and University of Vermont art professor Paul Aschenbach, seen here again working on his Vermont sculpture, organized the first of 3 symposia in Vermont. The first one was held in Proctor, Vermont, at the site of the Vermont Marble Company. The second symposium, 3 years later, was held in Williston, Vermont, at the site of S.T. Griswold Concrete Company. And Paul organized a third symposium 20 years later in 1991. But these sculptures did not become part of the highway collection. Instead, they remain in Burlington, and you can see most of them today around Battery Park. So let's go back to 1968 and the first Vermont Symposium, which, by the way, is only the second symposium held in the United States. The first was in California. 11 sculptors participated. And in this slide, you can see all 11 sculptors with some of their family members and even some of the officials from the Marble Corporation. 11 sculptors participated. They came from Germany, Japan, Yugoslavia, Austria, and the United States. And Karl Prantl, founder of the movement, was one of them. And because his piece is so important, we made special arrangements to clean and repair his piece this past summer, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. All the artists spent 2 months together in the summer of 1968. And here are actually images of those artists actually working on their pieces that summer. The public was invited to stop by anytime, and most of the artists brought their families and partners. At the end of the summer, the whole town was invited to celebrate. These are pictures of that celebration. And even the governor came. If you can see the top right image, that's Paul Aschenbach in the middle and Governor Howe, the governor of Vermont at the time. So it was quite an event. Now, they all stayed together at a local inn, and the inn is long gone, but the owner is still alive. And we recorded her memories, marvelous memories. One particular striking recollection is of a Japanese gentleman knocking on her door one day, asking if he could visit his friends, the 2 Japanese sculptors who were part of the symposium. She, of course, welcomed him, but as she said, "Mister," he quickly abruptly stopped her and told her to please call him, as all his friends do, Noguchi. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with the world of modern art, Noguchi is one of the greatest sculptors of all time. And the fact that he'd visit these folks is just quite a surprise. We've even been told that he carved a small sculpture during his stay and left it somewhere in Proctor. We have no idea where, but word's out that we're looking for it. The Vermont Marble Company, picture of the company in its heyday, donated material and equipment. Expenses for travel, accommodations, and modest stipends were covered by grants from the National Endowment of the Arts, the Vermont Arts Council, and the University of Vermont. Modest indeed were these stipends, $80 for each artist and apprentice in 1968, which is about $700 today. And later in the next symposium, it was just $250, a little better, but again, only $1,900 today. Each sculptor chose his block of marble or two from a vast store yard. And let me just mention a few interesting facts about the Vermont Marble Company. For over a century, the Vermont Marble Company was the largest producer of marble in the world. Not now, that's Turkey, and not the oldest producer of marble, that's of course Greece, and not the most beautiful marble, that's considered to be Italy and Spain. But Vermont marble is the hardest marble. So it's long been favored for building material, flooring, and monuments. So some of the most beautiful buildings in the world are made of Vermont marble, such as the Jefferson Memorial, the US Supreme Court, and the gorgeous Washington Memorial at our Arlington Cemetery. And it's this hardness we have to thank for the remarkably fine condition of all of our marble pieces. Marble's still being quarried in Vermont, and in fact, we have the largest underground quarry in the world. These are pictures of the underground quarry in Danby Mountain in Danby, Vermont. And most Vermont marble is actually crushed into powder. It's called calcium carbonate, and it's ubiquitous in so many household products, from toothpaste to paper to antacids to paint, to name just a few. The decline of both the marble and granite industries in Vermont started in the 1920s with the Great Depression, continued with the rise of cheaper building materials such as steel and concrete, and finally ended with the rise of diseases from breathing stone dust. And before it was discovered that simply wearing dust masks prevents these diseases, the stone industry had moved permanently abroad. So some of you may be doing the math. 11 artists, but only 7 marble sculptures in our collection. Well, here's what happened. 2 were left on the Vermont Marble Company grounds, and we don't yet know why. One of these 2, the one on the left, is nowhere to be found. The other, shown on the right by Paul Aschenbach, was recently found half buried. You'll see the image on the right. That's how I found it. Half buried on the Marble Company grounds, and we don't know why it was buried. We hope to return it to the collection. A third sculpture was dismantled by the artist. It's the sculpture on the left. And we're told that he didn't finish it, but actually I believe it was considered too dangerous to be assembled in public. And the final 4th missing sculpture on the right was actually donated by the artist Von Sartori to his alma mater, the University of Maryland, where it stands today. Now let's fast forward 3 years later to the second symposium in 1971. And here you see photos of the artists actually working on their concrete pieces. Aschenbach once again selected 11 sculptors, this time from Germany, Japan, South Africa, Australia, England, Colombia, and Czechoslovakia. And like the previous symposium, the artists spent 2 months together, this time on the grounds of S.T. Griswold Concrete Company in Williston, Vermont, now SD Ireland. The medium was concrete with which none of the artists had any experience. So the head of the company assigned his son, Doug Griswold, just out of college and soon to take over the company, to spend every day with the sculptors, teaching them best practices. As a result, the concrete mixes and the construction of the steel rebar and mesh infrastructure is the highest quality. And for this reason, the 9 concrete pieces are in exceptionally fine condition for 50 years old. And the picture on the left is actually the construction of the piece you now see on the right. We also recorded Doug's wonderful memories. He especially recalls that some of the artists worked the concrete just like they worked their most familiar medium. So for instance, the sculpture on the left by Bradford Graves looks like a carved stone. And the one on the right by Clement Meadmore looks like one of his many steel pieces. Doug felt that only a few of the artists actually worked outside their familiar boxes, such as Carl Floyd, that would be the top left, and Rudolf Uhr, bottom left, and Eduardo Ramirez, piece on the right. And once again, doing the math, there were 11 sculptors, but only 9 concrete pieces in our collection. This is because the one by Meadmore on the left was sold, and the one on the right by Kashida was destroyed two decades ago when it was moved during the construction of the Sharon Welcome Center. We plan to reconstruct it and return it to the collection to the delight and support of Kashida's family. Now, one of the traditions of the symposium movement is that each sculpture remain as public art in the city or state where it was created for at least the first year. After that, the artist has the option to sell it. So Meadmore was the only participant who sold his art. That's the piece on the left. But where it is now is a total mystery. But he's not the only participant whose art is in high demand. A collector in Florida offered to buy Prontel's piece, shown here. His daughter told us that he refused because he believed that the Vermont collection should stay intact. Instead, Prontel created another piece of art for this collector. And just in the past several years, yet another collector has come forward offering to take away the Prontel piece. But we intend to keep the collection intact. Now for the restoration. Let's fast forward nearly 50 years later, and COVID strikes. And my business, like so many others at the time, just stopped cold. So while I was waiting for the business to recover, I went looking for something to do. And actually, I have my wonderful wife to thank for my involvement in this amazing project, because she told me in no uncertain terms that I better find something to do with myself or she was going to kick me out of the house. So I approached the state curator, David Sheets, who invited me to take part in a very unusual project, to find a bunch of lost sculptures. And these slides show exactly how I found them when I did find them. Some I had a hard time finding. All these sculptures are hidden in the woods, behind rest areas. I felt like Indiana Jones hunting for them. So I did find them all eventually, assessed them, and helped write a grant for our Save America's Treasures program. We received the grant funding, which I hope I don't jinx by saying, so far the funding is not in danger. The grant covers phase 1 of the project, which is conservation, cleaning and repairing each sculpture. And by the way, this one by Aschenbach has a wild story. On the left is the original placement over 50 years ago. And on the right is how I found it. The story goes that a couple of decades ago, a local Boy Scout troop decided to clean this rest area for a merit badge. And when they came upon this sculpture, they decided it would look better upright. No one knows why. We're asking about in the Waterbury area if anybody knows. But it was it's quite heavy. So to actually put it upright is no small effort. So before our work of conservation could begin, we needed to do 3 things: establish our goals, create a plan, and get the plan reviewed. Our goals were set by our state curator. Goal number 1, restore each sculpture to its aesthetic beauty, not its original condition. In other words, we are not going to fix every single crack and chip, only the obvious ones, only the ones that distract. And our second and final goal was to preserve the collection for as long as possible, meaning establish a solid maintenance plan. Next, I created a conservation plan detailing every cleaning and repair method and product. And finally, I submitted the plan, as Darlene had mentioned, to the Getty Conservation Institute, one of the foremost conservation authorities in the world. And I'm particularly excited about this point because the Getty doesn't take every project that comes forward to them. They really pick and choose. So to have our project chosen by them and then assessed free of charge was really quite wonderful. So with a solid plan in hand and invaluable feedback from the Getty, work began last summer. I assembled a team of wonderful people, a graduate student intern, a local high school student, and 2 other local folks. Everyone was trained and all of our products and methods were tested. Incidentally, one of our sculptures was an abandoned encampment for folks without homes. So we had to carefully clear the site before work could begin. We all worked together 4 days a week for 6 months, from May through October, until weather actually prevented us from using our products. Many of our products we simply can't use if it's above 40 degrees. Well, we accomplished more than expected. We cleaned every concrete piece and a few marble ones, and we completed repairs on over half of the collection. So we're well on our way to completing this first phase this year, on schedule and on budget. Now, in addition to the 5 of us, we hired the sculptor Peter Lundberg, which some of you may be familiar with. He's a very well-known New England sculptor who lives here in Vermont. And we also hired a marble conservator, Florin Stajak, to focus on the cleaning and repair of our most valuable piece, this one by Carl Prontel. And I have to just say here that this project amazes me because over and over again, people just seem to drop out of nowhere to help us. And Florin is one such person. It's hard to believe, but Florin approached us and said that he happened to be a visiting restorer for one of our sculpture programs here in Vermont, and would we like him to help us out? He's a Romanian sculptor. He's a restorer, and he's very good, and he's very specialized in marble. So again, it's just one of these happenstances, but I feel like the artists above there are watching down on us. So anyway, this piece is not scheduled to be moved out of its closed rest area for at least the next year. So after it was restored, we enclosed it for protection. When it was finished, Prontel's daughter, Katerina, visited from Austria to see the restoration and share her memories. She and her mother were here with her father during that first symposium. She was only 10 at the time, but she remembers well the marvelous experience. Though all but one of the original sculptors has passed away, including Prontel, family members and apprentices have provided invaluable information. Katerina, for instance, confirmed that the position of the stones, she confirmed for us what the original artist's intent for the position of the stones are. And she also corrected our assumption that there was no title for this sculpture. It's actually titled Meditation, Stones for Meditation. So what were our methods and products? Well, first, what we encountered was a lot of dirt and grime, 50 years of it. Acid rain, industrial pollution, highway salt, bird droppings, moss, but mostly mold, black mold. We also encountered graffiti, both spray paint and carved graffiti, and various cracks, chips, breaks, and spalling. And if you can see the image on the top right and the lower left, these are examples of spalling. And spalling occurs when the metal mesh or rebar is too close to the surface of the concrete. This causes rust, which expands and blows out the concrete. And actually, there's not much spalling on our pieces, owing again to the exceptional construction. We remove the dirt with a combination of steam, water pressure, and brushing by hand. To remove spray paint, we used a non-toxic, water-based product, followed by steam and hand brushing. Once clean, we sprayed all the surfaces with a biocide to prevent further mold. And the next several slides are great examples of the results of our work. The right side is clean, and the left side is what the whole sculpture looked like when we started. Now for repairs, we coated exposed metal, and then we mixed archival cements and mortars, and then matched the textures and the colors. And this slide shows you a progression, the progression of work on one particular spalling. And if you can see the slide on the far right, that's our goal, to make every repair simply disappear. We had also cracks in a couple of sculptures. And for this, we mixed a very special archival mortar, very, very watery, low viscosity, as we like to call it. And since we wanted the mortar to be deep into the cracks, we actually injected it with syringes. For marble repair, we used custom epoxy mixed with pigment to match the texture and the color of the surface. For protective coatings, we generally avoided them, opting to allow the porous surfaces of both marble, yes, marble rock is actually porous, and concrete to continue to breathe. But there were a couple of exceptions. On all the marble, for instance, we applied a light oil developed by the famous Carrara marble people of Italy. It penetrates and protects without sealing. We also applied a special coating to only 2 of our 9 concrete sculptures. That's because the 2 had cracks, and this slide actually shows the 2 portions of the 2 sculptures. So to prevent further cracking, we applied a breathable but waterproof coating. All our work is guided by 2 bedrock conservation principles. First, we use the least aggressive method. And second, all our products are reversible. Incidentally, we moved 3 sculptures out of their rest areas to the Vermont Granite Museum grounds in Barrie. This allows us easier and more cost-effective access to equipment and utilities. Once we complete work on these pieces, they'll be placed on foundations and returned to their original rest areas. Now, some of our exciting plans for the future. But first, I'd like to invite you to join us. We formed a nonprofit group called Friends of Sculpture on the Highway. Join us because we deeply believe that more ideas and input, the better. help us shape the future of this collection. So to our plans for the future. When the first stage of conservation is completed this summer, our Vermont Agency of Transportation steps in with exciting plans to move sculptures onto foundations and then install accessible paths, evening lighting, signage, and landscaping. After that phase is complete, we plan to hold another symposium, this time in granite, and again with sculptors from around the world, and again placing the artwork in other rest areas. We also hope to excavate this half-buried sculpture by Aschenbach on the left and return it to the collection. We're talking to the company Omnia at this point and trying to make that happen. We also plan to reconstruct the Kashida that I mentioned that was destroyed and return it to the collection. It's the piece on the right. I mentioned signage. This is going to be a bit of a challenge because most of the artists held to a trend of their time not to have any name on their artwork and not to have labels or signage of any kind. The idea was to allow a more open, unfiltered encounter with art. But 50 years later, the public needs some kind of information. So to honor the artist's original intent, and at the same time inform the public, we're considering some kind of hybrid solution, such as nothing on or beside each sculpture, but perhaps further away, maybe at the head of a path, maybe inside the welcome centers. We also plan to integrate the collection into Vermont's growing tourism industry. And we have several wonderful ideas we're kicking around at the present time. I'll mention just one of them, such as a passport program where kids and adults get a stamp in their passbook at each sculpture they visit, then get a special patch when they fill their passbook. It's just one of a bunch of ideas we're thinking of. And I'll just mention just one more exciting plan for the future. And I know Eric's here watching, so thanks again, Eric, for all you did on this. Let me explain what happened. We want to make a traveling exhibit of Eric's photographs of our work over the summer. And here's just one more brief story of how we met Eric. So each day before we begin our work, we set up a sandwich board that briefly explains the project and invites people to interrupt us, ask questions, and many people did. And we really appreciated this because I don't know if you remember last summer, but there was a couple of weeks of brutally hot, humid weather. So when people interrupted us, it was really a joy. One day, Eric stops by and, and he offers to follow us throughout the summer, taking photos from an artist's perspective. And I just have to tell you the results, such as those that you see here. And I believe Sue is here on the phone, on the webinar too. That's Sue on the lower right. You know, his photographs are just stunning. So we're planning to creating an exhibit of his work that travels Vermont as we continue this multi-year project. Thanks again, Eric.
Thank you.
So in closing, I just want to thank you all for joining me. I hope you can tell I just love talking about this project. And once again, please join us. Join our Friends of Sculpture on the Highway by contacting me anytime. We'll keep you updated on developments and invite you to help in our planning. So again, thanks so much. And if you have any questions, just fire away.
Thank you, Bob. That was fascinating. I think the manner in which you developed this presentation aids with us all better understanding the end result, knowing the importance of the collection, the procedures that you use to work on the sculptures, the plans for future maintenance and acknowledgement, and certainly the great future ideas that you are in the stages of planning to share these treasures with the public. I personally can't wait to do an interstate sculpture travel tour as I go through Vermont. And excuse me, as Bob had mentioned, we're now opening the floor to any questions. And don't be shy.
Well, I'd just like to make a comment. That was a fabulous presentation. I
Thanks.
really, no, I really mean it. It hits all the points. And, you know, if I'm a potential donor, you know, I'd be very enthusiastic.
It's really good to hear because,
yeah. Well, I also want to thank you for allowing me to participate with my camera. So I thought this is great.
thanks, Eric. It's interesting you mentioned donors because that is one of our major outreach in the future is, of course, donors, because our grant funding only goes so far.
Yes, Rick.
Yes, to that, so you're not fully funded yet, and how much do you anticipate the whole project will cost, or are you trying to raise?
Great question. So as I mentioned, we have phases, and just to give you an example, the phase which we're really looking at 2028 to do the next symposium that I mentioned in Granite, we're probably looking at about $150,000 just for that project alone. Yeah, thanks for asking.
So, Bob, I have a question. Maybe this isn't the place or time to review it, but you know, I had been in contact with a friend of mine who lives right outside the University of Maryland, and she had pictures of the Campbell on that campus.
That's interesting. Is it erected with pieces on the top?
It was, well, I've got pictures. She sent me pictures of it, and it was a different configuration, but there were some that were lintels, but it was not exactly what you showed from what was in in Proctor.
Well, thanks for correcting me on that, because there is, you know, I made it all sound like everything's like I know it all, but actually we're being corrected about stuff all the time. You know, we hear one story and then the next story contradicts it. So thanks for clearing that up.
Well, she had friends that actually had Campbell as an instructor.
Oh.
And remember him being on the campus for a number of years. And then I think the photo was from like 2010 or 11. And I don't know if it's still there now or not, but she had one of her friends had it in her archives and she sent it to me.
Thanks, Susan. You know, that's what I was hoping with this presentation, is we get some of these mysteries solved. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm still hoping. I have a friend who used to work for Omya, and we're still hoping to go down to that site in Proctor and nose around. So
that's great.
Yeah.
You know, and in fact, if anybody's listening and knows folks at Omya, please get in contact with us, because our contacts are limited, and the more contacts we have in terms of success in excavating the piece that's there, we're trying to get some inroads there.
Well, Joel has given us permission to come, so
great.
it's a first step. But we just got to get together. Maybe now that the weather's nicer, we'll get down there.
Yeah, Joel, if I could just tell a very brief story, because Joel is wonderful. Joel Blumenthal, I believe his last name is.
Right.
An engineer with Omya. And I went down to the Proctor Marble Museum to help with another project. And, you know, while I was there, I was telling the fellow all about sculpture on the highway, because I just love to talk about it. And so he got excited and he said, Bob, you have to go over to that. And he pointed to a building across the lawn, a brick building. And he said, go over there and just go in the front door and ask for Joel. So I went over and I asked for Joel, and I explained to Joel about the project, and that so-and-so sent me over to talk to you because you had some kind of information. And he said, follow me. So he took me up to the attic and he pulled out this box, and there must have been 50 beautiful black and white photos, archival photos, some of which I showed you on this presentation. And I was flipping through them, and I saw I was amazed, but I was flipping through them and I saw this one with Paul Aschenbach carving this stone. And I said, geez, we just can't find this piece. I know he didn't destroy it. So he stopped me and he said, follow me. And Joel takes me out to the lawn, and he's the one who actually showed me this half-buried piece by Aschenbach. So we have tremendous thanks to Joel for his help in all this. And it's another example of people that just come out of nowhere to help us. It's wonderful.
Paul, please.
Hi. Hi, Bob. I was wondering, maybe you said this, but how many are at rest areas that were closed? How many are you going to have to move to
Yeah.
other rest areas?
Yeah, great question. We only have to move 3 of them to other rest areas, 3 of the 16. Yeah. But again, we're trying to, we're trying to bring back that buried one, and we're trying to reconstruct the lost one. So there's really 5 that we want to push to another rest area.
So is there a map on your website or anything of where we can see the ones that are available to visit?
Yes, 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 indeed. You've got my email.
Mhm.
And if you don't, anybody who doesn't have it, just talk to Darlene and just email me and I'll send you the map.
Right.
Greg, thank you for that question, because I love people visiting these places. And even if it's a closed rest area, you can get into these places. It's just that they're not, they're not advertised as rest areas anymore.
And you are aware that the Marble Museum is just closing now.
I just heard, and
Yeah, and the Preservation Trust is actually looking to disperse archives, collections, whatever.
interesting.
I mean, it's a real shame, but I know they've struggled for years with that, unfortunately.
It's a beautiful museum. I'm so sad about that, actually.
I had a question, Bob. Thanks so much for this presentation. It was really wonderful to see. And I've been following along on your blog for a few years now. So I hope we finally do get to meet up at a rest area this summer. I'm curious, and you answered this in part with your story about Joel, but where you found archival records that helped support or led you to new discoveries, and how much was kind of what records existed that you were able to locate, and how much was people telling you information that helped you? You've come so far in terms of what you now know about both of these events, and all of the things that were created at them.
Yeah, great question, Rachel. We have some archives from the Paul Aschenbach. He left a lot of things to the Library of Congress and to the University of Vermont. But actually, most of our information has been word of mouth. People telling us stories, the people we're interviewing, Doug Griswold, amazing memories. Katerina Prontel, amazing memories. This woman that, again, we were just talking about the project to somebody in Proctor, and they said, oh, you've got to go see so-and-so who was, who had the inn at the time, and all the artists were there, and it was loud and raucous every evening. And, it was just, and interviewing her was just fabulous. And every single person we talked to seems to open up another couple of people to go talk to. So one of my colleagues, all he's doing right now is tracking down people and recording their memories. So that's the biggest source of our information at this point.
Well, and there's people like myself and Tim and Scott who were actually apprentices at the Concrete Sculpture Symposium and lived with all the sculptors the whole summer.
Yeah, Susan, thanks. Yeah. And I hope I've given credit to you folks. Because,
well, I shared a lot of photos with you guys of what the scene looked like where we were constructing them all out in the meadow.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. And Omia, God love them, they have been very welcoming. They, as I mentioned, they welcomed me to look at these photographs. They've kept their photographs, which I don't blame them. It's part of their archives, but they've given us free hand to copy them. scan them, high resolution, so forth. So we do have records of them. Getting the piece from OMIA is a bit of a challenge. So if anybody has, again, contacts that can help us, please let us know.
Hey, Bob, I have a question about the Lost Meadmore.
Yes.
Oh, the one that was sold a year after. I tried to trace it down through the Meadmore Foundation. You and I communicated about that last summer, and they came up dry. There were a couple that almost looked like it, but is there any plans to recreate that?
Not at this point. And it's interesting, recreating something like that, you actually need permission. So it's, but that's a good idea that there is an active Meadmore studio. The studio is still selling his works worldwide. So that's a possibility for the future. Thanks.
Yeah, because you had mentioned recreating the one that was destroyed during the move.
Yeah.
And but I wasn't aware of getting rights or anything. But so, would you mind if I ask some questions about funding?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
So, I think it's a public record the amount of grant money you got last year.
Correct.
Yeah, it was like what, 400 grand or something.
It's a matching grant, and we haven't yet completed the match. We're hoping to do that. Well, we intend to do that this year, but the total grant with the match was $480,000.
So, is that money like available to you right now? I assume you've used some of it up for.
Yeah, we've used about 2/3 of it at this point, which is why I think it's safe, knock on wood, because it's already being used. If it hadn't been at least partially reimbursed at this point, I think it'd be in danger.
Right. So how much more do you need to raise to finish the whole project all the way to the end?
Well, that's a great question. We haven't put, I mentioned how much we're thinking of for another symposium. I haven't added it all up yet. We kind of take project by project, and we're trying to conceive of what each project is going to cost us. So, just the project of framing your pieces and traveling them around the state, we figure that's at least several $1,000s. So to answer your question, I don't have a final figure, but it's a lot. It's going to be, at least as much as we've gotten already from the federal government.
So presumably another grant, another 400 plus.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
But I've used to, somebody raised money in the past. You have a great story to tell to a potential. And I don't want to use the word investor because they're not getting much of a return other than the spiritual one, which you could say is priceless. But you've got a great story. You've made progress, apparently under budget. You've got the state grant money behind you.
Yeah.
And let's say you're looking for another 400 or 500 grand. I got to believe there's some, wealthy Vermonters with a passion for what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And we're on track to be approaching people, and also the Vermont Agency of Transportation. I have to give them a lot of credit. They are another bunch of folks that seem to come out of nowhere and said, this is a very exciting project. Can we be part of it? And we said, of course. And their work is really funded by their federal grants and state grants. So we're happy to have them aboard. They're going to be doing a lot of work.
They were fabulous to work with. I'll end on this note. I don't want to take up everyone else's time, but when you asked me to, get busy and photograph, there were two pieces that required their help. And within days, they had cleared one completely from brush, and they also gave me access to another one that was locked up. And they were right on it. So you got a great story to tell, and hopefully you can get some folks with big checkbooks.
Thanks, Eric. And you're part of the story. So appreciate it.
Hey, Bob.
Yep.
Mark here. You had mentioned earlier that there were 3 symposia. but you didn't mention where the third one was. Tell me about that.
Yeah, the third one was in Burlington. Again, it was organized by Paul Aschenbach, and it was 20 years later. And actually, in Battery Park, you can see many of the pieces to this day. Not all of them, but many of them.
Yep.
A lot
Thank
of
you.
a lot of the works were destroyed actually because they were placed along the lakefront. And since '91, the lakefront, as you probably know, has been well developed. And they were moved. Some of them were just stacked in a pile. So that's what became of that symposium.
Thank
Is
you.
it concrete or marble for that third one?
I have seen marble pieces, but I understand there was some granite involved, but I think it was mostly marble.
Bob, are there plans to make those oral interviews, those oral conversations with those who are still or were surviving at the time they were done, to make those available for public access?
Yeah, great question. Yes, yes, indeed.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank each of you for spending some time with us this afternoon. And for those of you in Vermont, I know you'll appreciate more now the sculptures that you'll see when passing by those rest areas, or wondering where those are that are hidden in the areas that are closed. And for any of you who have joined us from outside of Vermont, it certainly makes a worthwhile investment of time to come and visit, see the sculptures, and join in the Vermont festivities for America's 250th anniversary celebrations. So a couple of closing out points. A recording of this seminar will be sent, a recording of this webinar will be sent to you as soon as it's edited. April 3rd is the conversation with colleagues follow-up to this wonderful webinar. So we hope that you'll join us from 12 to 1. And I'd also like to mention that Bob and I are in discussions about him developing another presentation with respect to sculptures, but more identified with those institutions and organizations that have sculptures in their collections, and potentially learning ways that they themselves can care for those sculptures within the confines of knowing that it's work that can be done by the non-professionals and when to call in the professional. So if you haven't joined our mailing list, be sure to do so, and watch the CCCA website later this year for announcement of when we'll be making that available. And earlier, Erica did mention that if you're not already and would like to, please consider becoming a member. The criteria for our 2 levels is listed under the Get Involved tab on our website. And alternatively, if you simply wish to support this great organization and the work that we do, we also love to have friends support and identify with us. So on that message, if there are no further questions, and I would like to once again thank Bob for this wonderful presentation, and we look forward to seeing you, hopefully all of you, next week on the 3rd. So thank you very much.
Thank you.